welcome. I see there's a few people still coming in, so you know, we'll just get started as people filter in. The first bit is a little bit of an intro and a primer. So my name's Eden Badisher, and I'm the discussant. It's very unusual for the discussant to get up first and do what I'm doing, but there's reasons for that. So this presentation is connected to an Urban Education special issue that will be coming out. I don't know if it's the end of this year or the beginning, I don't know. I don't know when it comes out, but and it's the issue is focusing on the voice of people who are impacted by the justice system. So what we have up here are all the presenters, etc. I want to mention what STEMOps is really briefly. It's an NSF, National Science Foundation Includes Alliance, that is, the mission of STEMOps is that all people impacted by the carceral system are able and encouraged to pursue high quality STEM education and careers. And that might sound like a few people, but did you know that 1 in 2 adults have a loved one who is justice impacted? Okay? And then we think about our education system, we think about all the people involved in the various systems that impact this. When we're talking about all people impacted by the justice system, it's a huge number. Our target focus is the individuals themselves who go through the exclusion and the carceral system and the caging that results. But that mission is really about, is a much more diverse mission than it sounds initially. So here's how we're gonna go through the talk. I'm gonna do the intro and the primer, then one of each of the author team, although Michelle is a solo author, one of each author team will talk about elements of their paper, and I'm gonna come back and use the system integration to talk across them. So as a reminder, language does matter, right? And we default to person-centered language, except in the cases when identity-first language is preferred by the person or group under discussion, right? So there are contexts where identity-first is appropriate, but it should be at the choice of the person, right? So here are examples of person-centered, person-first, or identity-first language, right? And it can vary by context, right? Which one we go with. So just be aware, it's at the discretion of the person or population. There are resources up there. Of course, you just look them up online. You should be able to find deeper discussions about this. This matters to us. Again, I mentioned that this is about the voices of previously incarcerated people and their allies. Every one of us up here is connected to the carceral system in different ways. Some of us are previously incarcerated. Some of us have family members who are inside. Some of us have actually been on what we would call the victim side of things, although I would flag that the word victim needs critiqued, so let me just say that. But so all of us are connected, some more directly than others, but all of us are connected to this space. This is the name of the Urban Education special issue. And so in terms of starting the primer, system thinking iceberg, I'm sure many of you have seen this before. This is an underlying way of thinking about the systems that we interact with. In our case, STEM education for people who are impacted by the carceral system. Events like an iceberg are the top, they're the things we see. It's sort of see patterns, but most of the stuff is invisible. And so when we talk about system thinking, to help us analyze or get at systems, we use a science called system dynamics, which is really to help us understand feedback. Now, if we want to think about feedback, we have to get rid of our standard notions of linear thinking, of cause and effect. I do something, it's gonna make a change. And we really have to begin to understand that the action and the effect actually will then circle back around and cause impact on future actions. So we do use mapping in all sorts of ways. So here are just some pictures of different ways you can do mapping. And one of the reasons we do this is because social issues, science issues, many of the issues that we wrestle with in our country are complex. That's not new to anybody. But what we don't talk about is the complexity is actually an integral part of the problem. So when we try to narrow down and simplify, and we remove the complexity, we're actually ignoring a huge part of the problem itself. Right? So think about why we need to think of this. Any knitters in here? Crochet? Anything? A couple of you? You ever had those balls of yarn that get mixed up and oh God, you gotta, great, you find an end, you start undoing it, and you're working over here, you're like, oh, I'm making progress, and then all of a sudden you notice over here, everything is tightened up, right? So not where you're looking is great, but what you're doing here is causing all sorts of stuff to happen over there. And if I don't turn my lens to over there, I completely miss, right, that complexity, that interconnection. And so that complexity is critical. We want to keep it, right? That's part of what we want to do. But it's also problematic because things evolve, we have lots of needs, stakeholders, etc. There's time lags. You should have had effects by now. All sorts of crazy stuff. So we have to learn and think about how we're going to work in this sort of unforeseen system, if you will, when we can't see everything, and knowing that our models aren't great. We can act. That's see what sticks. Doesn't work. We can simplify, remove part of the problem, or we can engage with systems. So you're going to see a rapid fire set of things about a system, and then I'm going to go away. Coffee and me. It's not really me, obviously. I drink tea. But when you think linearly about a problem, I drink a lot of coffee, I don't get sleep. Simple problem. There's a good answer for that one. Stop drinking coffee. It's that simple. Well, when we start looking at feedback, it's not nearly so simple, right? I have a certain amount of coffee I need in a day. So when I wake up in the morning, I wake up with a coffee shortage, right? But if I drink coffee, it's gonna decrease that. Really quickly, polarity. If the relationship is such that an increase in one leads to an increase in the other, or a decrease in one leads to a decrease in the other, that is what we call positive polarity. There's a little plus sign down there. So as I need more to function in a day, coffee-wise, my shortage when I wake up is going to get bigger. On the flip side, negative polarity means that things move in opposite directions. If you're a science person, there's a reason we don't use indirect and direct variation. That's purposeful choice. But in this case, I have a coffee shortage. As I ingest coffee, more coffee, my shortage goes down, right? So this is what negative polarity is. In our slides that you'll see, the positive polarity is denoted by red links. The negative is actually done by purple links. So just so everybody is aware of that. Oh, but that didn't show up on the screen. So that is a primer when you start to see system maps. I'll talk a little bit more about them toward the end, and you'll see me a few times in the intervening moments. But I will pass this off now to Christopher.
Thank you, Edith. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. So my name is Christopher Etienne. I am the STEM Ops Coordinator for the Prison Teaching Initiative out of Princeton University. And today I'm going to be going over the paper I wrote for the Urban Educational Journal. And it's focused on designing it's called Designing the Divide, you know, where I kind of go into the school to prison pipeline, and I speak about how STEM exclusion actually exacerbates issues brought on by the school to prison pipeline. So, we're all familiar with the school to prison pipeline by now, right? There's been documentaries like all over. There's been scholarly articles that kind of go through it. And we kind of get the gist of it, right? So we know that through the school to prison pipeline, we have identified several factors that contribute to students disengaging with their education, leaving school, and finally being forced into prisons. Some of these factors we continue to highlight are socioeconomic factors, because we understand that property taxes fund public schools. So students who hail from low-income communities are less likely to receive quality education, or the same quality education that students who hail from more affluent neighborhoods receive. We understand that this lack of funding leads to a lack of resources that ranges from educational equipment to teaching talent. Finally, we transition into punitive disciplinary practices, all right? Where black students are primarily the victims of punitive disciplinary practices. For instance, black students represent 13% of the student population, but account for 30% of students who are suspended and 33% of students who are referred to police. And most of these suspensions and arrests are due to disorderly conduct, right? Which could range from threatening behavior. So threatening behaviors could be something as simple as talking with your hands. That could be considered a threatening behavior. And also raising your voice when you get excited about something, right? That can also be considered a threatening behavior. So a lot of students are literally being suspended and arrested on school grounds because of cultural norms, because the instructors that are in these spaces are unaware of these cultural norms of communication and end up penalizing students for engaging in those cultural norms, right? So punitive disciplinary practices like this cause our students to disengage from with their education, eventually leading to students leaving schools. So we know this as school dropout, dropping out of schools, but Dr. Richard Milner identifies this phenomenon as school pushout, because basically if you feel unwelcome in the institution that you're supposed to be learning in, and you feel ostracized because of your skin color or the way that you participate in cultural norms, then you are less likely to engage with that atmosphere, and you are actually forced out. It's not a thing that you just woke up one morning and said, hey, I don't want to deal with education. Like, it's the education institution itself made you feel unwelcome, so you develop an anti-intellectual approach towards education overall. So we all understand as well that when students are unable to acquire their high school diploma, they are more likely to land in a carceral space. So if you have to settle for low income wages, you're more likely to engage in nefarious activities, in order to make ends meet. But today, what I'd like to do is to focus your attention on one variable that we tend to overlook, that actually exasperates the school to prison pipeline. And that is STEM exclusion. So the lack of resources that I referenced earlier regarding school supplies and teacher talent actually compounds into broader issues of exclusion, right? because of the lack of funding to actually hire quality educators and negative stereotypes associated with low-income communities, urban schools tend to lack the means to provide advanced science and math classes. One could say there's a direct correlation between race, income, and the type of STEM courses provided at these schools. According to data by the U.S. Department of Education, high schools with high enrollments of low-income students are 42% less likely to offer calculus classes, 22% less likely to offer advanced math classes, 31% less likely to offer physics classes, and 15% less likely to offer chemistry. Right? So high schools with high enrollment of students of color are 24% less likely to offer calculus, 10% less likely to offer advanced math, and 17% less likely to offer physics. So what does this mean? Well, just by being a student of color in a low-income community, you can be restricted from participating in STEM education. So, why does this matter? Well, because it's bigger than a student's educational experience. See, understanding math and science plays an essential role in our ability to navigate through society. Civil rights leader Bob Moses spoke of the importance of STEM education, stating that today, the most urgent issue affecting poor people and people of color is economic access. In today's world, economic access and full citizenship depend crucially on math and science literacy. I believe that the absence of math literacy in urban and rural communities throughout the country is an issue as urgent as the lack of registered Black voters that in Mississippi in 1961. So Bob Moses believed that unequal access to STEM education would be a driver to problem. I agree with these sentiments, but in this presentation, we are taking it one step further and arguing that this in itself is a driver towards incarceration. Rather than focusing strictly on quantitative and qualitative data to ascertain our claims, I decided to take a different approach, which I feel is often missing from our conversations of the school to prison pipeline. What I wanted to do is spotlight social issues that contribute to the school to prison pipeline by focusing on the voices of people who are directly impacted by this phenomenon. And this is what we all bring to our research. And on the slide, you'll see the names of my contributors in this paper. In our research, we interviewed 7 formerly incarcerated professionals who are either currently working in STEM or participated in STEM-based internships. Their stories spotlight vast disparities that led to their disengagement with education and set them on the path for incarceration. Fortunately, our contributors were able to take advantage of higher education during their incarceration. And this was a product of Pell Grants. So initially, just to give you a briefer, if you're not aware of Pell Grants initially were introduced after organizers of the Attica uprisings were able to springboard their demands for access to education during their protests. Later on, the Obama administration would later introduce what would be known as the Second Chance Pell Grant, which is being used to extend post-secondary opportunities to the currently incarcerated population. But my issue with this terminology is that when we're referring to justice-impacted people who are currently incarcerated, a lot of them had to wait until they transitioned into prison to be able to take advantage of quality education. So how can you call this a second chance at education when you hail from schools where instructors are absent more than 30% of the school year, when you are subjected to random searches, forced through metal detectors, and incarcerated on school grounds? How can you call this a second chance at education when learning disabilities go unnoticed through K through 12 education in low-income schools? 20% of students in low-income schools suffer from learning disabilities that go unnoticed through their whole journey through their K through 12 education. So how can we call this a second chance at education when students are given hollow high school diplomas after graduation and they still struggle with basic math and literacy skills after graduation, when college prep programs don't exist and the classes students need to successfully transition into college are unavailable? So when we say second chance at education, this is glaringly inconsistent with research we've been able to uncover through scholarly journals, quantitative data, and the personal narrative of our justice-impacted scholars, because for a lot of them, they never received a chance at education in the first place.
All right, you get me for a minute, but it's really clear. So system mapping, this is an example of a system map, and this is a system map to which Chris was talking about. So up here, for example, we see disciplinary referrals, right? If you look up at the top, quality of public schools, right? We see that as quality of public schools, I wish I had a laser pointer. If that goes up, instructor quality, these are typical, this is not in every case, obviously. Instructor quality goes up. As generally speaking, when instructor quality goes up, the quality of public schools goes up, just so you see what you're looking at. Now, Chris introduced something called STEM exclusion. That happens in resources in the quality, but it also happens in the classroom.
It's a pointer.
Oh my God! That's all right, no worries. I have a good shadow. I have a really good shadow. He introduced, this is a new idea, right? How does this contribute? So if we look at instructor quality loop, right? If we look at instructor quality all the way up there, as that goes up, STEM exclusion would go down. As STEM exclusion would go down, student engagement should go up. As student engagement goes up, again, this is purple, disciplinary referrals go down, follow the loop around, quality of, as a school that doesn't have a lot of referrals is perceived, quality of the school is going up. And that leads to an increase in the instructor quality. So as at a system level, never at an individual level. So that's something to remember. But look, STEM exclusion, student engagement, Chris already spoke about how student engagement does what? Disengagement in that particular case. So as student engagement goes down, incarceration is going to go up. So as STEM exclusion goes up, engagement goes down, incarceration is going to go up. So there is a link through the impact on students of STEM exclusion. Oh yeah, that's right.
I gotta take my jacket off. Keep working.
Get comfortable.
Got some work to do. Good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon.
Reclaiming Humane Mathematics by Eden Badisher, Jody Lambert, Amy Shapiro, Otis Jennings, Avery Aho, and myself, Jason O'Malley. Go ahead, next. So how do we come to claim that we need to reclaim a humane mathematics? Well, came off the work of STEM ops and mapping the carceral system to design STEM pathways for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. And one of the findings was that math is a consistent barrier. It's seen as a barrier to access for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. How can that be? The M in STEM. How can that be that it's a barrier? So we, as the author team started to come together, even started to pull mathematicians and math educators and students together, we started to question and examine this. And one core belief that we found right away that we have is that every human being is inherently mathematical. And that was our guiding principle as we moved forward. So one of the metaphors, there was a running metaphor throughout the paper that we were riffing around was this idea of kitchen table spaces. And it came from when I was 5 years old and I was in these little projects outside of Youngstown, Ohio, and my mom was teaching me math with flashcards. Fast forward 10 years down the road, I'm 15 years old, we're at that kitchen table again. Except this time, I'm teaching her algebra to help her get her GED so that she can get a job and we can get off welfare. So we said, well, how can we create our classrooms to have this same level of intimacy and where the role of educator and student transitions seamlessly, where we're learning from each other and we're teaching each other. We also looked at another metaphor, playground learning, right? If you think about it, think about children on a playground, they're having fun, they're making stuff up, they're experimenting, and they're making mistakes. But that's okay because they're learning and they're having fun doing it. Inevitably though, we had to take a look at something that we weren't proud of. This discipline that we love called mathematics. Math harms people. One of our authors, Jody, told us about a story how her first experience in algebra, she was made to feel less than, incapable. She ended up giving up. She left school, and later in life she made some poor decisions that led her to prison. But the authors, as we were reflecting on our stories, our shared stories, this consistently came up. In my 15 years of incarceration in the feds, I was teaching mathematics, and I had students from all over the Northeast and Midwest part of the country, from large cities, and they were sharing the same story. They'd say, I can't get this math. I've never been good at math. All the letters, and what is all the letters for, right? And I would say, who told you you can't be great at math? Who told you that? Who told you that you can't go to the university and excel? We had to challenge that poor math identity. Next slide. Mathematics. So you see all that math on the right there? Did that cause anything in you? Any emotion? Some anxiety? Yeah. And so through the review of literature and through our stories, we found that math is a discipline that has a persistent and prevalent anxiety that's associated with it, a consequential result. And we said, we argued that when you're, as a student, consistently exposed to this high level of anxiety, that it results in trauma. And that this anxiety-induced trauma is one of the key elements that makes mathematics the primary academic contributor to the school-to-prison pipeline. Not to mention the gaslighting. Jody's story, the system, math, made her blame herself. She blamed herself for her inability to get it. Next slide. Some of our methodology was narrative inquiry, phenomenological inquiry, memoing, cross-disciplinary literature review, and my favorite, we just plain old got it in. In this virtual space, we got in the lab, the author team and I. We got in the lab and mixed it up, and we were modeling the type of humane mathematics, the type of humane space that we're arguing for. Now, I will say this though, that citation, O'Malley 2023, you do not have to write that down. You will not find that in a journal or in a paper. But if you share a classroom with me, then you can. Next slide. Okay, thumbs up or thumbs down. Now, I could, in good faith, argue that we need a more humane mathematics and more humane learning spaces and just sit up here and talk at you. So I need your help. So I need a thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm going to read all the way through and then you can tell me how you vote. Thumbs up if you believe that designing learning spaces to meet basic psychological needs of autonomy, relatedness, and competence will increase a positive, productive math or STEM identity, or thumbs down if you think it will decrease a positive, productive STEM identity. So thumbs up or thumbs down? Yes, that's what we found too. As Ryan and DC, through self-determination theory, argue that if you are having these basic psychological needs met in your life, it will tend towards thriving, flourishing even. So we said, as math educators, we certainly should be designing our spaces that are meeting our basic psychological needs. Now, we can't control anything outside of that space, but we can certainly control that space. We can design that space to meet those needs. Next slide. Okay, one more time. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up if you believe that fostering the use of intuition, facilitating access to formal disciplinary agency, and that allowing our students to interrogate the mathematics and examine the socio-cultural context that math is situated in will increase math or STEM success, or thumbs down if you believe it will decrease. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Yes, that's what we found too. As Burton notes, intuition, if we set up a classroom to help to foster intuition like mathematicians do, math researchers, they use their intuition to go down a path and say, you know what, I think this is the route. But it's okay if they're wrong, but sometimes they are wrong. But because that forms and informs our lived experience as well, which will guide our intuition going forward. But how can we set this up and model this in our classrooms, right? And as Pickering noted, as Pickering noted, the dance of agency, right? Where we go in between personal agency with the mathematics that we have and choosing which route we want to go, and then the disciplinary agency, the formal disciplinary agency, where after I have my findings, I need to be able to communicate to other mathematicians or others in the field, right? So we said if we can set up these spaces to meet basic psychological needs, we can help to form their intuition, right? But if we're not given access through the formal language and the ability to progress in math, now that's not very humane. And finally, on this last, the socio-cultural context, to be able in a space where you can interrogate the mathematics, you can challenge the space, you can start to look at how it's situated, how is math situated in the culture, share your experiences, talk about mathematics. Next slide. So again, here's our definition of humane mathematics, and we certainly, this is required, but not all-inclusive. We say to be humane, you have to meet basic psychological needs. You have to do math how all human cultures have done it. As Bishop, an anthropologist, Alan Bishop, has said that playing, designing, explaining, counting, measuring, locating, all cultures do this. It's inherently mathematical, right? Students have access to progression through formal mathematics. We have to give them the ability to progress in mathematics by giving them the formal language to do it. And finally, that mathematics should be a space where students can interrogate the math, examine the social-cultural context that it's in, and share their experiences. How have you progressed in math? What are your experiences like? Next slide. Okay, I know this is your favorite part, causal loop diagram. Okay, so I'm going to walk up to the screen as well here, and we talked about this concept of making mathematics more humane, right? So if we intervene in the system and make this new variable, or at a mental model level, we make mathematics more humane. If we make it more humane, it'll increase the strength of positive, productive STEM identity. Well, you all told me that. I'm sorry, I used y'all a little bit as a focus group to show you how we got it in a little bit and create these causal loop diagrams, right? So you told me if we make a more humane mathematics, it'll increase the positive, productive STEM identity. So that would be a positive polarity. Increases and increase. Thumbs up. All thumbs up today. No thumbs down. And then if your progression in STEM and your success in STEM will increase as well. Next slide. Lastly, we argue and we believe that cultural learning spaces are precisely the type of fertile ground for this type of math revolution to occur. For this new humane mathematics to be interjected into a society, into a culture that is often very inhumane. The residents in carceral facilities are too often, educationally malnourished, yet they are hungry for knowledge. They are human beings full of potential and creative energy, that if we just believe in them and we just provide some support, they'll be running to algebra class, not from it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Brian Best, and I'm a PhD candidate at Vanderbilt University. My research seeks to demonstrate how Black communities can leverage their own talents, skills, and resources to counter systemic forms of injustice. As a researcher who was taught the history of the Tuskegee experiments, the bell curve, and other forms of social science racism, I take the position that modern day race research must pay reparations in the form of sound, rigorous research that disrupts deficit narratives. I say all of that to say that it wasn't until I joined the STEM Ops working group that I realized that I was completely missing the mark in my own work. You see, I was able to say all of the right things because I had been exposed to social justice theory. But one of the things I learned through the working group is that experience is always a better teacher than text. And it's because of this group that I was able to learn from the experiences of others, specifically my colleague and friend, Jamil Span, and his unflinching analysis of the criminal injustice system. And so, broadly, here are the 3 lessons that I've learned from my participation in the STEM Ops working group, the first of which I've already mentioned, is that experience is a better teacher than text. The second is that the biggest perceived threat to the prison system is collective consciousness and a commitment to upholding the humanity of those around us. What do I mean by this? Society tells us that a person's success is based largely on their behaviors. By extension, when people are punished, we tend to assume the punishment was fair, appropriate, and perhaps even necessary. Unfortunately, this logic led me to lose contact with one of my closest family members when he was caged some 20 years ago. At the time, I didn't have the words to express the pain that I felt about losing someone so close to me. All I knew was that my big cousin had done something bad, and that meant we couldn't hang out anymore. Over time, however, I came to recognize this dehumanizing framework as foundational to the criminal injustice system. And it leads me to my third point. The dehumanization of caged persons can be disrupted by decriminalizing urban schools, countering negative media narratives, and increasing an overall awareness of racism. I would love to talk for days about how much I've learned from my brother here and from the group, but just these are just the highlights. In terms of language, I also want to point out that because of my participation in this work group, I no longer refer to people as incarcerated. I refer to them as caged or formerly caged, something I learned from Jamil here, because that is a humanizing perspective. When we think of the word incarceration, or at least when I think of it, it's more distant, it's more disconnected, it's more, this is just what it is. When someone is caged, it reminds you that this is a human being who is forced to live inside of a cell, and in many times they are unjustly there. So with that being said, I just want to kick it over to my good brother here. Take it away.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. How y'all doing? Thank you for coming to our session. My name is Jamil Span, and I am many things, but I'm a survivor of 12 years, 9 months, and 6 days of incarceration in Missouri prisons. Because I'm formerly incarcerated, I am really precise about that time because it was a long time, right? So, I recently celebrated 6 years of freedom on March 23rd. And I appreciate the context from my brother and panelist, Chris, when he was saying about first and second chances. So for me, this is a legit second chance. I was a student at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee in my junior year, in the fall semester of my junior year when I got in trouble. I come from a family of educators. I knew better, I made poor choices. Those choices got me a 15-year sentence and I had to do 85% on it. That's just the way it is, right? So, those two factors, right? Being from a family of educators, being a person who was granted a legit second chance, were like the foundation for me of understanding the value of the opportunity that was at my fingertips, right? So I ended up at a prison called Missouri Eastern Correctional Center. It's toward the end of my incarceration. This is when I'm able to finally access the higher education prison program opportunity. So Washington University in St. Louis came to the prison, and not a lot of people showed up to sign up for that. But again, given my lived experience and coming from a family of educators, I knew exactly how valuable that opportunity was, right? So I'm like, they're gonna have to tell me no, right? So I applied and they didn't admit me. Not the WashU program, but the Department of Corrections. They literally screened my application. On the application, it was asking how many credit hours you had received prior to applying for this opportunity, and I shared that I had been a student at Fisk and I had, I think it was like 76 credit hours or something. They were like, I was talking to a caseworker, I never forget this. A caseworker is a person, it's a CO, they wear plain clothes and they do the classification stuff in the back office. And this woman looked at me and she was like, Jamil, I'm gonna be honest with you. My firm, which is another CO in plain clothes, who runs the, yeah, legit, who runs the housing unit, told the caseworker to tell me, unofficially, off the record, you got too many college credits as it is, we're gonna give other people an opportunity. But fortunately, WashU was thoughtful in their programming to some degree. They had a book club and they had a chess club, and those were open to the whole general population. So of course, again, understanding the value of WashU showing up in a prison, I joined both the chess club and the book club. And as I was preparing my things to say here today on this panel, I almost forgot to just give respect and honor to two brothers who WashU brought into the prison before I got out that literally changed the direction of my life. One of them was a brother named Reginald Dwayne Betts. He was a second-year law student at Yale Law at the time, and that did something for me. They gave us an opportunity to talk to him. They gave us an opportunity to connect with the brother, and he was just like one of us. We were talking about lifting weights and, different other things that were unrelated to his book. It was a memoir, and it's called A Question of Freedom. Check that out. And they also brought in another brother, and his name is Mitchell Jackson, and he recently won a Pulitzer Prize for an essay that he wrote on the life and murder of Ahmaud Arbery. He was at NYU at the time. He had recently won a book award for his book, The Residue Years. But I say those things because even before I was admitted into the WashU Prison Education Project, I had already begun like a covert campaign to interrogate their systems, not just because they didn't admit me and I didn't know it at first, but because I wanted to understand, like, how are they making decisions? Why are y'all bringing in European civilization 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? I'm not connecting. I need to understand how this is working. And they were honest. They told us, and I learned about something called an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. They had to run all of these things by the Department of Corrections before they brought classes in. I didn't understand that. Like, you all are the professors, but you're deferring to these rural turnkeys to come up with decisions about education. In any case, the title of our paper is, as you all, is now in the carceral state in educational practice, is centering collaboration and voice of formerly incarcerated to enact transformation. So WashU got a lot of things wrong, but they brought in Mitchell Jackson and UrbanEd, right? A couple weeks ago, I was admitted to WashU Law School. And then last week, they told me that I had been awarded a full ride and stipend money. It was a hell of a journey, but I mention those things because UrbanEd, who was at Yale at the time, he pulled me to the side and he was like, you don't realize it, but you're more than halfway there already to where I am. And I was like, how? I'm not even in the program. He's like, make them tell you no. So, and then I was like, well, how? Because I was always thinking about what I was going to do when I got out. I was like, I'm going to go get a commercial driver's license. I need to get a job, right? And the people were telling me to do something that was uncomfortable. It was like uncertain. It was up in the air. And then when I got out, eventually I did get accepted to the WashU PEP. And as soon as I got out, they told me, look, all of those classes you took from our tenured professors, 22 credit hours, those aren't going to count to a degree, so you're going to have to start over. I didn't feel the slightest bit discouraged. I was like, you're giving me an opportunity to apply to WashU, I'll take it. So fast forward, I graduated, finished in 2020 with my undergrad, and just kept pushing. One of the other things from our paper was carceral logics, right? Carceral logics are all the ways in the tools of incarceration that operate, like captivity, punishment, surveillance. And that's a thing that I want to impart here because carceral logics operate not just in carceral spaces, but in society, right? This is one, right? I haven't been wearing this lanyard because they make you wear these in prison, right? Right. I lost it, but when I came in to try to see the Cornel West speech, there were hotel staff there like, hey, you don't have a lanyard. You need to have one or present one that show that you need to be here. I'm running up on time, but I wanted to share that I got an opportunity to lead the STEM Ops Data and Measures group because I was working in the space with people who looked like me. I see Dr. Carey in here. Thank you for showing up, Dr. Carey. Dr. Lori DeLille O'Connor, the Vanderbilt leadership team, Dr. Ira Murray, Dr. Tina Lane Bonds, Dr. Richard Milner. These are folks who empowered me and made me feel that I wasn't out of alignment. I was very much in alignment. And when I found out that I got accepted and I got a full ride, these are the first people I reached out to. Like, yo, I almost wanted to say like, we did it. Because I feel like community building is the biggest piece to higher ed in prison, right? And it's not a whole lot of that in prison, but those programs create space and opportunity for community building and create space and opportunity for opportunities like the people you see on the stage. I've been in community with Dr. Andres. I've been in community with Michelle. She probably don't even remember at InShip. She was telling me about addenda whenever you did the keynote. Yeah, she was like, look, you're gonna have to explain everything that happened. If you apply into a graduate program, they wanna know all of your criminal history, just lay it all out. And I just stayed in community with folks like this, stayed in community with people like Terrell Blunt, Bria Willingham, Dr. Bria Willingham, Dr. Aaron Corbett, you know, just Kayla Elliott, just so many different people who just poured into me. And that's the reason why I'm here today. So thank you all.
I don't actually want to follow any of the speakers, but I want to just point out, this is another piece of of the system maps. What we have up here is higher ed. By the way, these are top level maps. All of these variables have maps underneath them, right? To get that dig into what these things actually mean. Over here, you see student-instructor relationships. Want to talk through, there's potential quality in any higher ed and prison program, which Jamil spoke to, but as the quality in what they bring goes up, DOC, Department of Corrections, become fearful of the ideas, hence European history or, you know, things like
European
that.
civilization.
Yeah. It causes, as the quality gets better and opportunities, their fears are gonna go up. So what is allowed to come in, the actual quality that plays out, goes down, right? So as the fear goes up, the actual quality goes down, which impacts instructional quality, okay? And the instructional quality, you know, and then it turns back and feeds back up into it. Over here, Jamil talked about the people who were critical in helping him be where he is right now, right? So those the instructional quality, their perspectives, etc., are critical to engagement and success. So I'll stop there. I know this is the boring stuff, sorry. All right.
So, hello everybody. My name is Michelle Daniel Jones, and I'm a 6-year doctoral student at New York University. I am also offering an article with all these gentlemen for the STEM Ops Special Journal article, and I'm formerly incarcerated in the state of Indiana for 20 years and 7 months to be exact. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about is like how some of these classroom engagements worked for us in the state of Indiana in a history project in which we started, and how we had to work through some of these systems that they're talking about, these student success systems, these causal loops, in order to accomplish our goal. So you can go to your next slide. So, did you know that the Indiana Women's Prison is historically recognized as the first public prison for women in the United States? Prior to that, incarcerated women were held in a Jeffersonville prison in a dorm that was off the main entrance of the prison, and guards and the superintendent were allowed to go into those units and sexually violate these women. There were actually babies born in that department, and guards were charged by the warden $10 a month for open use of that department. So we entered this research because of the prison reformers, Quaker women, who came in to remove these women from being incarcerated in a co-setting with men to their own facility. And so when that place opened in 1873, 18 women were removed from the men's facility. And you can go to the next one. And so we started, go back to our book project, yeah. So we started in 2013, and we were gonna write the first 15 years history. It was collaborative. They reached out to all of us who already had earned a bachelor's degree. The state of Indiana, when Pell was removed in the 90s, began to pay for that tuition themselves. Very unusual, so we didn't use federal dollars, but we received state dollars. And so we had college education from the 90s up until 2012. When all of that measly $9 million was removed. So what happened is that Dr. Kelsey Kaufman came in to offer an ad hoc program that was ran by volunteer faculty and retired faculty. And we started with just a room full of about 7 or 8 women. We were divided into groups. We studied areas of interest to us. She didn't make us study what she wanted us to study. We were able to, like, if we're interested in economics, architecture, what did they eat? How did they make money? We were able to do a deep dive in whatever we wanted to learn more about. My field of inquiry was data analysis, and I studied certain very notorious women. And our group was working with graduates and non-graduates, undergrads, and amazing state librarians to get this project done. It was really, truly a collaborative project. So the book is arriving next month. I do have a copy here. It's called Who Would Believe a Prisoner? Indiana Women's Carceral Institutions, 1848 to 1920. This book is unique in most offerings coming out of carceral settings because it's not a memoir. It's not the story of our incarcerations. It's the story of women whose voices were subjugated at the opening of this first prison, and we are telling that story. We are reclaiming those women's voices and using that history in order to critique our present time. So with that, we can go to the next one. We presented some conferences. All of this was done in prison. We used the distance learning equipment that was available for women to do hearings remotely, and we used that as a way in which to present our work. And also to have some amazing visiting scholar courses with, like, Khalil Gibran Muhammad and Heather Thompson and Elizabeth Hinton. And so these became like my heroes and sheroes because they were willing to come beam into our prison and give us this experience. You can go to the next one. While behind bars, we had opportunities to publish work. This published work was literally what was my receipts that I stood on to apply to grad school and actually get in. Next slide. And we received some key awards for the history project. And next slide, we also got the amazing opportunity to then again work with other people other program practitioners, faculty people who wanted to create similar projects across the country, and we got to work with other folks. We actually did, I'm actually still working with Women Transcending. We did a documentary with Tomoka Prison with the guys. They researched the enslaved human beings who built the prison in which they were in. And they did deep census record archival research to reclaim those voices who actually built that prison. Very powerful work coming out of Tomoka. Next slide. This is all of us who had part of the project. 5 of us are out, and the rest of us are still behind bars. Next slide. So what I want to go in a deep dive in now is to talk about what was the methodology that came out of this experience. It was done as a reflective project to write this methodology because we could not do standard participant observation. We couldn't do standard research methods to encompass what we went through as incarcerated scholars doing this research. So I developed a new methodology, and I call it the embodied observer. And the embodied observer is is physically located in a captive setting and utilizes that purview of captivity as one of the lenses in which they use to engage with archival research. Of course, we are women, we are mothers, we are, we're white, we're black, those are also lenses. But what we had collectively was our lens as people under captivity doing top tier archival research. So the point of that is that the reason why I didn't go specifically just to a prison setting is because the concept of an embodied observer captures the difference between the body under literal confinement and that same body subjected to the taint of criminality. It's a type of confinement that happens post-incarceration. So the embodied observer is not limited to the experience of incarceration of a physical prison. Carceral geographic spaces writ large are key for the inscription of confinement that remains on the body, and therefore this methodology could apply to other carceral spaces like asylums, orphanages, hospitals, mother-baby homes, Magdalene laundries, feeble-minded homes, juvenile homes, schools, and jails, right? So, we can go to the next slide. So what I'm sharing with you at this point is my reflection of 10 lessons that I learned, or that I feel like, and this is not all of them, right? You got a journal article, you gotta have a nice tie-up. I chose 10, right? 10 ideas that came out of doing this history project that I feel strongly could correspond to optimizing the delivery of STEM in prisons, okay? First, I wanna say that it's providing, wait, no, I'm on the wrong slide. Is it the strength of instructors? Okay, so I've got them first.
No, I'll just move on and then go back.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's the one. Okay, so the strength of instructors' asset-based perspective. The lesson that we learned out of the history project was to replace epistemic injustice and biographic mediation with epistemic privilege. So epistemic injustice is denying our right to be a knower of our own experience, or denying the right of the value of captivity as a lens in which to approach an archive. And biographic mediation is a way in which people in authority, whites in authority, elites in authority, have the ability to speak more authoritatively about who you are above yourself. And so replacing epistemic injustice and biographic mediation, we chose to develop this idea of epistemic privilege. We're gonna privilege the actual reality of what it means to be behind the bars and what that means when approaching our real archival research of a carceral space. We're gonna privilege that experience. And why? Because it yielded such great fruits. No Indiana historian has captured any of what we pulled together in this book. But because we privileged our lens of incarceration as a lens, we privileged that experience. So culturally, the student success model has this idea of culturally trauma-informed training. With that, we argue that we should focus on the idiosyncratic and the fragile. Now, when I say that, the idiosyncratic and the fragile, what I'm talking about is incarcerated scholars must engage in the kind of same embodied observer methodology within STEM fields. So like on a practical level, incarcerated students will raise important questions about the types of STEM programming offered in prison. You've already just heard this. For example, we are more aware of how challenges with occupational licensure and the countless ways that collateral consequences of criminal convictions will affect our ability to be gainfully employed in STEM field. To be clear, privileging the knowledge and experience of incarcerated students in the creation, delivery, and career trajectory in STEM instruction and its related fields will eliminate many of the roadblocks that educators cannot see entirely because it's not their lived experience. So incarcerated scholars will interrogate existing data in a unique way as well, and we showed that with the project. Because no one had found some of the things or asked the same questions of the archive that we have. So the third lesson that I learned is about this idea of student engagement. Incarcerated people will ask questions and take serious topics that others do not, yielding new insights and countering standard narratives. So our goal is not to replace standard histories about prisons in the state of Indiana. No, we want to complicate any dominant narrative with our text and our research so that we add what you said, Eve, this greater complexity in the understanding of what's happening behind bars. And we do that by offering our voice to this work, and that's an example of a high level of student engagement. The fourth lesson is create continuity in coursework over time so that students can develop expertise. We developing expertise as historians or cultural historians studying our carceral experience allowed us then to extrapolate, or as Callie Gross says, do informed speculation about what happened to these women and girls. We were able to gain enough understanding about carcerality for women and girls in the 19th century that we were then able to extrapolate and critique our own experience in a deeper way. And that's what I'm talking about when we're like developing that expertise. Last slide. So that ties right into providing professional development opportunities. Opportunities to publish, opportunity to read, write, and speak across a curriculum is important in all fields, but especially in STEM fields. And so we draw this parallel here, because without that access to present our findings at conferences, to write journal papers, to do podcasts, to do interviews, to submit things for publication, to write a book proposal. We were able to take those necessary reading, writing, and speaking skills and apply that over into the rest of our lives. We were able to level up, if you will, because we had those trainings, those practices happening in the carceral setting. Another lesson is research must be helpful and non-extractive, and that correlates to quality of STEM education in prison. There's nothing worse than incarcerated people being and feeling like a researcher is coming in or a historian is coming in to do more extraction of them and their stories, to collect, to eat off this body for their own career development and furtherment. How you counteract that is that it must be helpful. It must be interesting to students what you're studying, what they're studying, and you can offer examples that can impact their lived experience. For example, one example I put in the article is, people incarcerated in prisons in Detroit are concerned about water quality, just like everyone else is. But the prison would not let them do a water quality survey, a scientific experiment on the water quality here, but you could do it in the neighborhood around. You could bring it in so that then they understand a little bit in a deeper way how water quality is impacting their carceral experience with a real live problem that we're trying to solve, right? The next one is faculty should be vetted and non-transactional with students. So that's that confirmatory discriminatory bias. Let me tell you, you are not a savior. You are not here coming into any kind of carceral setting to save anybody. We all come with our own innate capacities that sometimes need to be nurtured so they can flower and bloom. But that savior-rific orientation, that idea that you're a faculty member bringing in a program and everyone must just be loyal to you and bow down to you, that is not what you were owed. You are developing colleagues. And if you can hold that understanding in your consciousness, you will be more aware of other faculty members who are looking for transactional relationships with students. The next idea, and the last three are about DOC. Work with students to find ways around carceral setting obstacles. We know the system of incarceration better than anybody. A lot of people think that we don't, and therefore they do not reach out to us when they're trying to come up with ways to create programming to bring inside to us. But you should ask us, because we understand how to work within and around these systems, particularly with people who you find in carceral systems who are thriving. I knew everything. So I also know that I will also protect a program if I find value in it. And so I become one of these people who are watching out to make sure that the program is protected because I value it. For example, if you left your keys on the table, I'm gonna say, Miss So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so, you left your keys. You can't leave your keys. Or you left your radio. You can't leave your radio. But creating that relationship where the students trust you, then you can find ways around carceral setting obstacles. So the ninth one. Distancing mechanisms help make incarcerated scholars' research possible. We were never allowed to research our lived experience of incarceration, our conditions of confinement in any way. However, by researching the 19th century, it was deemed safe by departments of corrections, and they had no idea how we were using a research of the first prison for women in the United States to critique our current lived experience of incarceration. They just saw papers with the 19th century, 19 this and 19 that, and they had no idea that we were doing deep reflection about our lived experience in the conclusions and in our live conversations, that we were able to Skype into other, conferences. But that's the work. There's other ways to do distancing mechanisms so that, for example, if men or women in a STEM class and they wanna study something about their lived experience, as I gave with that other example, find a project near to, so that they're able to engage in real meaningful research and they can figure ways around, not getting your program in trouble, them in trouble, getting programs canceled because they're studying the current environment. Lastly, start with technology, and then have a backup plan. A lot of people just wanna kind of bring programming in, but listen, carceral systems are not monolithic. They are composed of human beings with bodies and brains. If you come with them with ideas with technology and not thinking that, oh, they're just not gonna allow you to do it, figure out ways in which you can bring the technology in because they need it. STEM education has a component that requires that technology piece. And for someone like me and our team who was trying to put 85,000 words together, it would not have happened on a handwritten anything. And it just is not realistic, right? So start with a plan and have a backup plan, right? And so those are just 10 of the lessons that that I have learned and have extracted from doing this history project with a collaborative group of women inside a carceral system, inside an evangelical Republican conservative state of Indiana. Thank you.
Kind of popping up again. You've seen this for the most part in the previous discussion, but I do want to point out again a couple things. So one, you see this new green arrow in there. I put that in there to highlight the fact that quality, and Michelle talked a little bit about the quality of the work they were doing, happened because they were really purposeful in how they pushed aside the DOC constraints, right? So they actually interrupted what we call a causal loop diagram. So I want to flag that.
Cool.
In addition, we heard lots of things, but instructional quality and the perspectives of the people coming in are critical. And so again, we see this loop coming back again. How they are engaged is directly responsible, or directly, I don't know if that's the right word, but to student engagement and student success. And if we're not doing that, what happens with the disengagement that we saw at the beginning, right?
Right. So I'm gonna offer the opportunity. One, I want to thank you for staying with us. I am the last presenter here. If you need to stand up and stretch out a little bit, feel free to stand up and stretch out. We've been at it for an hour and 10 minutes here, so I appreciate you. We have about 20 minutes left. I should only be about 10 minutes, and then we hopefully will have about 10 minutes of questions or so. So thank you all. My name is Stanley Andres. I am a formerly incarcerated individual who was sentenced to 10 years in prison. As a prior and persistent career criminal, I had a prosecutor pushing for 20 years to life in prison because she felt that I had no hope for changing, and in her eyes, I was going to be in this revolving door of incarceration. Fast forward some time, I'm now Dr. Stanley Andres, an endocrinologist, scientist, and professor. At the mecca of historically black colleges and universities, Harvard University. I was also at Johns Hopkins for some time as an adjunct, and I hold some visiting professorship roles at Georgetown, and that wasn't quite enough, so I took the hustle across seas, and I was a visiting professor at Imperial College London for some time. What I'll be talking to you today about is some work through an organization that I co-founded called From Prison Cells to PhD. It is the same title as my book that I recently wrote. If you're interested in grabbing a copy, I encourage you to grab a copy. It's on Amazon. You can get it in audio version. It was a #1 new release in educator biographies on Amazon, so I encourage you all to take a look. It's about my story, but it's really not about me. It's more about the social, societal, political, cultural things that go on for an individual like myself who comes from the Ferguson, Missouri area, and all the things that we know about that particular type of area in our country, to landing in prison to talk about some of the things that Chris talked about and many of the folks here. So the book kind of details that process and what it looks like for someone to come out and ways to support individuals. So that was the impetus behind, this idea of me going from prison cells to where I am now, was the idea behind starting the organization, which runs a program called Prison to Professionals. We recently were fortunate enough to get some Bill and Melinda Gates money to open up a research division of our organization, which is primarily focused on providing direct services and also working to change the narrative around the policy and advocacy side of things. But today I'm going to be talking to you about essentially something that came out of our research and evaluation division of our organization that was looking at our program and how providing a structured support system and mentoring could help facilitate this transformative power of education for currently and formerly incarcerated individuals. So when we, to shoot out some numbers that we all are probably familiar with if you're sitting in this session, the US is the world leader in incarceration, approximately 2 million people in prison and jail, 70% people of color. Within 5 years of release, depending on how it's calculated, 71% of individuals end up re-arrested or incarcerated. Participating in correctional education is shown to reduce recidivism by 28%. This is a very popular study by the Rand Corporation that many people in the field cite. But education, we all at a conference like this know the power of education, but now with folks like this and work like what you've been hearing going on, we have real data behind showing this transformative power of education. But most people who end up in prison don't have access to what this paper is really arguing and showing, is that most people who end up in prison don't have access to systems of support which would enable them to benefit from higher education. So, a lot of work has come out now that shows that higher education is valuable to people who've been in prison. But what we're arguing here is that without providing the proper support, even though that Pell is reinstated, for instance, and we heard some authors talking about that, if they don't have the proper support, they won't be, we won't be able to capitalize as much as we would like to in terms of Pell restoration. I don't know if I went ahead too many slides. So this this paper is really discussing our program, the Prison to Professionals program, which is a college readiness and leadership development initiative meant to help instill what we call our scholars with a sense of hope, self-worth, and empowerment, and helping them to push towards their full potential. So what the program entails, I'm going to kind of skip through mostly because it's going to be included in the paper if you want to learn a little bit more about that, but to save some time, I'm going to kind of speed through the full aspects of the program. But there's two parts of it. There's part one is kind of a 2-month portion of workshops, which this details some of that. And then part two is this 1 year of continued structured support, academic advising, weekly tutoring, coaching, and mentoring, and utilizing something called the strength-focused framework, where we believe that the person has all the things that they need to succeed. We just want to help bring those assets out of that individual. And our staff and the individuals that work with us all receive numerous trainings from trauma-informed cultural sensitivity, mentoring training, and the understanding that words matter. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work, and I'll tell you the methods as we go through the methods. There was essentially, we were comparing the individuals that went through the program, dividing them between STEM scholars and non-scholars, and comparing that group of people that went through the program to people who did not go through the program, as well as to national college student data. So I'll go through and skip through these methods because I'll kind of talk through them here in a moment. And oh, I think I'll figure it out. I think I'll figure it out. That's all I had to do. I had to just remember. So I'm actually going to take you through a audience response system. So I want you to pull out your cell phones. And all you have to do is on your cell phone, so don't follow that first top line, follow this, can you see my pointer? Yep. Follow this line here, so you're gonna text message, so pull out your text. The body of the text should be Stanley, ANDRI, 621. The phone number that you're texting to is 37607. So text that Stanley ANDRI 621 to 37607. That will allow you to enter the system, and then just text A, B, C, D, or one of the responses here. The first question that I want to talk about is what % of currently and formerly incarcerated people are interested in pursuing an advanced degree? So let's see how fast our fingers are to get. So we got some folks in the system here. And so it looks like what % of currently and formerly incarcerated people are interested in pursuing advanced degrees? We have a varying range of numbers here, from 6%, the majority saying 11 to 20%. So I'm going to tell you the answer that we found here in a moment, but just keep this mentally in your heads for a moment. And I'm going to go through several questions rather quickly before showing you some of the answers from our work. What percentage of currently and formerly incarcerated people are interested in pursuing a STEM career? So you don't have to re-enter the system, you can just give your answer. So what % of currently and formerly incarcerated people are interested in pursuing a STEM career? So we have some varying responses here, and we will dive into that here in a moment. Looks like most of you said 31 to 50, about 43% said 31 to 50. So moving to this last question before I jump back into the data, what % of currently and formerly incarcerated people have a reentry mentor or a reentry support network? So it looks like most of you are saying that it's 1 to 10% in terms of what % of currently and formerly incarcerated have some form of reentry support. So the data that I will go over with you will discuss some of this, some of these answers. So to go into our results this is some data from January 2017 to December 2020, where we had about 1,400 people contact prisons and professionals from 34 states and 4 countries. 38% of them applied to what we call our scholars program, so about 540 individuals ranging from 18 to 67 with a median of about 34 to 42, 2/3 of which were people of color. So of the 540 applicants to the P2P Scholars Program, something quite unique in terms of we don't have any type of requirements on the type of crime. Many organizations don't take people with sex crimes and don't take people with certain violent crimes. We accept all people, and actually about 80% of the people that we work with have crimes considered to be violent crimes. Most of our applicants had some form of higher degree attainment which was which is 37.5% did, which was higher than the national average, which is, that's a little bit incorrect. There's about it's flipped the other way around. 95% of formerly incarcerated people do not have any type of degree attainment. So our population came to us with some type of degree attainment already, but 76% were looking to get to that next level. So most of them were looking to get to some type of next level in education. Some of them were looking to strengthen where they were at currently. To divide up that 540 applicants a little bit further, so 38% were aiming for a graduate level or professional degree. This is something of kind of a new finding in the field. A lot of college and prison, for instance, is not offering any type of graduate level education for individuals. There's a number of reasons for that. There's funding for it, but also I think, as we talked about a little bit with that iceberg effect that Eden opened up with, it's the mentality. A lot of the people that are actually running programs for people on the inside don't believe that, think that they have a potential cap, and graduate school is sometimes thought to be beyond that. But our numbers show that many people are looking for those types of degrees. Also, the 35% of that 540 were looking for STEM education. So again, breaking that idea of, people with criminal convictions don't want or don't think that they're smart enough. There's the population that we connected with, want to pursue this type of education despite, the barriers that we talked about here. A large majority, 66%, don't have any type of reentry support, and a large majority were currently unemployed, as well as a large majority, much higher than the national rate, were homeless. So to look at some of our data, 94% of our scholars who completed Part 1 matriculated into a college program. Of those that completed Part 1 of the programming, 58 or 92% matriculated. Those that stayed engaged with the programming, all of those that stayed engaged matriculated. And in the population of people that did not go through the program, it was a 25% matriculation rate. In terms of employment, this P2P program has a 92% employment rate in comparison to 28% from the folks that applied but didn't go through the program. And this is higher than the national data on people with convictions, which sits at 73, which flipped the other way, means that there's a 27% unemployment rate amongst those formerly incarcerated. And we found that there was a higher rate of consecutive employment amongst the P2P scholars. We also found that they persisted at a higher rate, so they stayed in school for a second year at a higher rate than the non-P2P group. And the GPA was stronger amongst P2P scholars than non-P2P scholars. And graduation was stronger or higher, so 100% of those that were eligible to graduated, which was much higher. Recidivism, we calculated just because some of our funders want to, but we know that recidivism is not really a strong mark of success of how well people are doing, but our recidivism rate was very low. And so I'll stop there just to buy some time and pass it back over to Eden.
So we are actually, I'm not going to be able to go through much of what I was going to talk about, but I did, before we do that, I just want to highlight, this is the re-entry piece that a map that Stan started talking about. And whereas Michelle, when we saw that line, for example, talked about interrupting loops that were happening, Stan is approaching it by adding new loops that support engagement. So I do want to flag that. Before I say anything else, because we have little time left, any of you are researchers, you have evaluators, right? That you have to, if you could put your phone up, and we tested it, it works. If you could respond to this survey while I do the last 2 minutes, that would be really super duper awesome. There are a number of big takeaways that from each of these incredible papers. And so I feel really good about being the one that cut my stuff because it's actually a whole lot less interesting and less impactful. The purpose of what I was gonna do was talk about why we really need to take this kind of work and marry it with system level understanding. So I would say, just so you get a flash of what we were gonna do, these are the 4 maps I was gonna go through and integrate them so you could see how all these maps come together. And remember that idea of the string, you're unwinding it over here and something over there happens. It's this kind of map that allows us to figure out where we need to look for impacts that aren't right in front of us, right? So I do want to highlight that, and I think that implications of what we're talking about, that we are all implicated in this carceral system, right? Everybody is implicated in this. But for us as researchers, what we research in addition to who, why, how, and for what ends, right? As well as thinking about research or position. We have to recognize that the education system in particular is complicit in our carceral system. We are complicit. And so how do we start tackling this? Take seriously the need to value these personal experiences, these local experiences and perspectives as critical to being able to learn. That we have to take seriously. System perpetuation is at work. It's not the individual people and I did it, why can't you? It's not. We have systems pushing everybody, right? And these people and the systems interconnect. And if we can recognize that and work to see it, we're gonna make progress. And just as in STEM, we make in math in particular, I'm a mather, we make assumptions and we pursue those logical ends. We have to do that with our assumptions and with our research, right? Work to understand how our mental models impact how we frame our research, but also we need to, before we act, before we conduct research, we can use maps to think about, if I enact here, what part of the system am I enacting? What is that gonna look like for the people involved? And where are those unintended consequences? And that is one of the most important things that we can do, is use the integration to be able to begin to understand how our work here, because we all work locally, right? We all have our work. How is that gonna connect with the system to impact other people? So that's that. We have to thank our funder. And
So according to this time here, we are right at 1 hour and 30 minutes, so this session is over, but if you want to stay with us, we would love to take some questions, if you have any questions.
I had a question that I have to remember. It was for Chris. It was about, have you had a chance to learn about the teacher buy-in when it comes to, the push out and, trying to dismantle the push out process? Does that make sense?
So, you said the teacher environment?
No, the teacher, buy-in to it, cause I know part of, your diagram had showed that it accounted for, the teacher, effectiveness, and then there was, a loop where, I was trying to, remember, how it, I cannot remember, but it was like how it impacted, like positively impacted the process of having the kids to not be impacted by the push-out practices.
Yeah, like, how
Like
would it-
student engagement,
Yeah,
that's
student
what it is,
engagement.
yeah, to the student engagement decrease the disciplinary actions. So this whole, your research, with teachers, looking at this, do you know anything about, is there any buy-in with, the teachers of, this process that, you're talking about?
Yeah, I would say that, so one of the things that I touched on as well was teacher quality, right? And so when you're speaking about, kind of teachers taking responsibility and kind of placing, these issues on their shoulders when it comes to ensuring that students are engaging in their class, it really depends on the quality of teacher that you have. So unfortunately in low-income schools, they require teachers to have less degrees, if any teaching experience at all sometimes, because in low-income schools, instructors who may just have a teacher certificate, will be allowed to come in and teach a class. And if a teacher isn't present for a class, in a lot of low-income public schools, janitors and lunch ladies can come and sub in for these teachers as well, right? And so what we find, is just a myriad of issues. One of them, when I stated earlier that you have in the average public school or low-income public school, teachers are absent for 30% of the school year. That right there ensures that a teacher isn't able to build a personal relationship with the student to understand the student's ability to actually learn, because you could be an audio learner, you could be a visual learner, you could be a hands-on learner, and developing that type of relationship in class, ensures that you understand what type of learning your students are, and it fosters trust, between a student and an instructor. And also, when you're dealing with instructors who have been able to go on and get their masters, have took different courses in engaging students with education, they're better adept to dealing with students, who may be quote unquote disruptive in class, and getting a better understanding on different learning differences that students may have that may cause them to disengage in class. So it really depends on the quality of the instructor. And through the research, we found that instructors that are better informed on how to navigate classrooms usually shoulder the burden. But instructors that are literally just placed, as placeholders in these spaces are usually just passing out packets, And so, that's where, the teacher buy-in comes from. It's a resource that really falls down to education and experience and understanding relationship development in these classrooms.
Maybe one or two more questions? Yes.
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. A couple of years ago, I worked with Missouri Higher Education, or I heard you say you're from Ferguson. So we were looking at doing research for them as in their quest to increase employment rates. And what I found was that many of formerly incarcerated individuals were not even considered as part of the working group in the state of Missouri. And so my question, given that a little experience that I have, is what is the role of state government in ensuring that the constant reduction in reducing the recidivism rate keeps going? What should state government do to ensure that individuals don't re-offend, as your data was telling us, so that they return to the incarceration system?
I mean, that is a thesis project question right there. There's a lot that they should be doing. I mean, a simple answer is really believing the problem exists. So I think a lot of, there's a lot of examples that show that government doesn't really understand that they're part of the problem. So I think there needs to be an understanding of how they're part of the problem, and them understanding that, and then, putting dollars behind change that is driven by the community and by individuals directly impacted is one way that I think government can. So understanding that they're part of the problem, because they're part of the problem, it might be a good idea to provide resources to community and people directly impacted.
Can I piggyback off of that? So when I think about the state's role in reducing the recidivism rate, what comes to mind for me is the relationship the state often plays with private prisons, and the fact that they will employ private prisons or offer leases to private prisons to keep people incarcerated. In the state of Tennessee, where I'm from, I know you live there too, if I'm not mistaken, the governor of Tennessee at one point tried to establish a 99-year lease between the state of Tennessee and Core Civic, the private prison. I say all of that to say that the state, in my estimation, based on their behavior, based on their history, they have no role in reducing the recidivism rate because it doesn't put any money in their pocket. It's not part of their business practices. Like, they are incentivized to keep people in prison, right? And so, as a person who formerly worked in like education policy and was able to kind of be in partnership with people at the state level, that does not mean that they're all inherently racist, that they're all inherently biased or prejudiced, but they are working within a multi-layered, multifaceted system, right? And so I do think that ground level efforts to reduce the recidivism rate, like the people representing these organizations on stage, I do think that is a great role that we can use to lower the recidivism rate, but I just don't see it coming from the state level. I don't think they're walking through that door.
And really quick, I love what you just said. The only thing I want to add to that is that what information does the state government get about the potential for criminality and incarceration? The research that they receive is that test scores, reading scores, math scores, they look at those, they have people doing research that says failure in grade school means we're gonna have to build another prison. We're gonna have to build more infrastructure. We gotta go get these long lease because schools, elementary schools are failing. That's their narrative that they're receiving, their researchers are providing them. The work that Stan is doing, and all these folks on this panel, they don't get that research, right? And so the body of information that they're working on is also inherently built on a civil idea that we do not have eligibility for personhood. And when you don't have eligibility for personhood, you can think of a kid who's failing in grade school and be like, I gotta get this prison ready for him when he's 18. And that's steeped in our long histories of race and class and sex and criminality. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the most sickening statistics to think about, that they're looking at a little baby and thinking about prisons. And that's the reality of the world we live in this country.
One thing I want to point out too is, well, first, that's the crux of the problem. I just want to say that is definitely the crux of the problem. But just even trying to chase the metric, to Stan's point, to try and to meet that metric, that's part of the problem too, and helps to keep the system in place, because it's just a failed metric. It's trying to capture behaviors we don't want to do. It's a low bar. If someone just doesn't go back to prison, doesn't mean they're doing well. it doesn't mean they're thriving.
Right.
So, and we've argued in other spaces that we need a strength-based metric to capture, what does it mean to be an adult thriving in multiple contexts? So how do we capture that, and how do we build programming to help individuals so that they will have the tools to thrive in life? And so we have to change the whole mindset. And then, a model now as it stands, the prevailing model to get DOJ funding from grants is to categorize individuals as potential risk. What is your potential risk? You're not a potential human. You're not a human being full of potential to succeed, but you're a potential risk to recidivate. And so, and you can't even get funding from the government sources unless you have a tool that will assess individuals as potential risks.
So with that, I think we will close it out. Thank you again for joining us, and
And if you guys are interested in information about the book, I have little postcards here for you guys if you're interested. Well, y'all gonna get the hookup for sure. That's that. Shows that this is spelled, right? Like, they know what's on the I mean, I'm like so impressed when I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be so loud. Because it was loud. I'm not sure if I'm